Have you ever noticed how quickly our minds allow us to move into a future that doesn't exist yet? It only takes a second. One conversation, one job interview, one date, and suddenly our minds have built an entire life around a possibility. And before anything actually happens, we've already handed our emotional state over to an outcome that we can't even control. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Rebuilt Different. I'm Epiphany Page. And I've been asking myself lately, when does that shift actually happen? Because nobody wakes up and sets out to do this on purpose. You don't just wake up and decide to get attached. It just sneaks in. Sometimes it happens so quietly in the background that by the time you catch yourself doing it, you're already emotionally invested. And the funny thing is, I don't think it starts from a bad place. I think it actually happens because we're hopeful. Hope is what makes you apply for the job. Hope is what makes you say yes to the date or start that business that everybody told you would fail. It also makes us step into rooms that we probably don't feel like we're ready for. Hope isn't the enemy. In fact, I think it's probably one of the most powerful things that we have. I think part of the issue is what our brains do right after that. Because our brains love to predict the future, and we love to spot patterns. In fact, I think we use those past patterns to keep ourselves safe and to recognize opportunities and to grow. But somewhere between, I really hope this works out, and I can actually see this happening, is where something sneaky shifts. We stop just imagining a possibility, and we start emotionally living in a future that hasn't been handed to us yet. Think about a basketball game. 1 second left on the clock, your team's up by 2, everybody's on their feet, crowd's already celebrating, people are high-fiving, hugging the people next to them, and then out of nowhere, Steph Curry comes from the parking lot and hits a buzzer beater. Game over. And the craziest part about moments like that, it's not just because the other team lost. It's that for like a full 5 seconds, everybody in that room had already experienced the win. Their bodies, their emotions had fully processed a win that wasn't even solidified yet. And that's exactly what we do in our everyday lives. We emotionally move into futures before they've actually happened. And trust me, I'm not pointing fingers here. I have experienced it many, many times. I used to do this all the time in my career, and honestly, I catch myself still doing it quite a bit. But years ago, back when I was younger, when I was, first starting in my career, every single meeting felt like the meeting. I remember sitting down with someone who used to work super closely with Russell Simmons, and before y'all get on me, this was before we knew that Russell Simmons was doing some sus shit. But I walked out of that room on cloud 9, thinking that this is it, this is my moment. And I wasn't just excited about a good conversation. I was already mapping out the introductions, the massive career shift, the whole trajectory. I built a whole life, a whole masterpiece in my mind before I signed one piece of paper. And spoiler alert, nothing came from it. Not because it was a bad meeting, not because I had been lied to. It just wasn't meant to be what I had already pictured in my mind. And then years later, another instance, it happened again. I had this business idea that I completely believed in, and I found this competition in the city, in New York City, for ventures that people thought would positively impact New York. And the grand prize was $100,000. So I applied, actually made it to the second round, and while I was waiting to hear back, I wasn't just hoping anymore. I was already mentally spending that $100K. I was scouting storefronts in my head, building out the operations, living in the win. It felt so real. Then the email saying that I didn't get it came. Now, I'm not Delulu. Deep down, I knew it was a long shot. I knew there were a ton of other incredible ideas in that room. But I was hit with this heavy disappointment. And when I finally sat down with myself and asked why it stung so bad, I realized I wasn't grieving the loss of the contest. I was grieving the loss of the future that I had already built in my head. And here's the thing that kind of messed with me afterwards. I didn't just feel disappointed by the decision. I let it get in my head. I started second guessing myself. Maybe the idea wasn't as good as I thought. Maybe I'm missing something here. But none of those thoughts were based on actual facts. They were based on one decision made by one group of people on one afternoon. Looking back, that's a whole lot of authority to hand over to strangers. Because one person, one company, one rejected application does not get to decide the value of something that is important to you. And I think that was the moment I became more conscious of separating two things that I used to lump together, which is the outcome itself and what I chose to make that outcome mean, because they're not the same thing. There's also something I keep reminding myself of lately. Stop making permanent emotional decisions based on temporary information. One job interview or a bad date, temporary information. One no from an investor, that's an opinion. And it's not the whole book. It's a sentence on a page. If I had let that contest convince me to abandon my idea, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. Even though the business didn't work out, it made me pivot into something else that I really enjoy doing now. If I had let that music executive dictate my worth, I would have handed over my piece to a situation that was not mine to control in the first place. Dreaming isn't the problem. Getting hyped is not the problem. Attachment is. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with imagining what's possible. Just don't move into the house before the future hands you the keys. Because the truth is, some things won't happen the way that you'd hoped. But other things will turn out infinitely better than you could have ever imagined. And I've lived through both. The future has humbled me more times than I can count. I've been 100% convinced that something was going to change my life, only for it to fall flat. And on the flip side, some of my biggest blessings in my life were things that I never saw coming in a million years. So now, when I catch myself mentally spending the money, planning the relationship, or building an entire future off of one conversation, I pause. Not to ruin my own fun, of course I want to be hopeful. I want to get excited about what's possible. But I'm no longer willing to hand over my piece to something that's still in process. Because life has taught me something simple. Possibility deserves your excitement, but certainty has to be earned. All right, guys, that's been another episode of Rebuild Different. Thanks so much for watching. If this episode hit, I'm glad it found you. And if someone popped into your head while listening, pass it along to them. Because I think a lot of us could use a reminder to stay hopeful, but just not build your whole future off of something that's in the unknown. Again, thanks for watching. This has been Rebuild Different, and I'm Epiphany Page. I will see you guys next week.